1, 2, 3.
This could never be. You're not the type for me.
Really?
But there's not a spark inside. What a waste of a lovely night. Alright, welcome to the Pitcher Podcast, where the conversation is free flow. Everything is on the house. We just sang La La Land, and all we ask for in return is for you not to give us 1-star reviews. I'm Cody.
And I'm Ian.
And today we're going to be talking about kind of murder mysteries, part 2, / talking about Nightstalker. And if we run out of things to talk about, we'll talk about Los Angeles or living in another country.
In La La Land.
In La La Land.
Which is why of angels.
Which is why we just sang.
No,
a lovely
it wasn't connected. I just wanted to sing the song.
I wove it together afterwards.
But for our culture corner, we're going to be talking about documentaries. Cody has a great one. So do I. So
you are going first.
No, Cody.
100% you're going first.
Cody,
I'm not going to talk.
Oh, you're going to play this game? Okay, fine. Oh my god. Essentially, the documentary that I watched, or a short documentary that I did watch, was this one called Your Friend the Rat. It is made by DreamWorks, I believe. No, Pixar. And it's an extension from the movie Ratatouille. It's a 12-minute short that kind of goes over the history of rats and why humans and rats should be friends. And essentially covers like things that rats were a part of in history, like the Black Plague, how they were like transported all over the world through like colonization, and how rats weren't the reason behind the Black Death. It was kind of like this flea that attached to rats. Rats were just like the transporter of the disease. Which I think most people know, but it's exciting to look at it and watch it through an animated format. I think this is great for kids to be able to educate themselves in a fun way. And I myself am a bit of a kid.
And how did you watch it? Like, what got you?
Oh, it's because I was watching Ratatouille like this week. I'll talk about that in the weekly catch-up, but because it's such a monumental part of my life.
Okay.
But
Sounds
yeah,
good.
give it a watch. Okay. It's a nice 12-minute podcast. No, documentary.
Okay. Mine is called Metal: A Headbanger's Journey. And it was made in 2005. It won like a ton of awards in 2005 and was like a very influential documentary in the mid 2000s. But it's essentially talks about it's Sam Dunn, this like metal lover, but he's also an anthropologist and like a documentary maker, and he interviews a ton of different like influential figures within the metal world, and breaks down like all of the different subgenres of metal, how it came to be, like metal's roots to like Beethoven, and there was one other really, really influential classical musician, and then
Tchaikovsky.
No, it wasn't Tchaikovsky. But actually, I'm not completely sure his name is Sam Dunn at this point.
Yeah, I just searched up Sam Dunn, and there's just like generic LinkedIn profile.
Let's see. Yeah, it is Sam Dunn, actually.
Oh, it is Sam Dunn.
But anyways, it's super good, and he interviews a ton of like really, really like A-list people within him within the metal world, and so it was really good. And the whole reason I was watching it is because I was helping my girlfriend with an anthropology essay that she had to do, and this was one of the assigned readings that you could choose. And so,
my God, he's made so many metal documentaries.
Yeah. And so it was really, really cool, actually. And like part of it was talking about like the rise of metal in like the 1980s, and then how like American like middle class white people were super, super like concerned about it, and like it being like a way for Satan to like influence young kids and like get kids to like kill people and stuff. And so like they set up all these like committees and stuff to like review and censor the music. And this is like stuff that I could remember like my parents actually talking about, like growing up in like the 1980s and stuff, especially growing up Christian.
I don't blame them. Metal as a genre does promote a lot of that sort of like, it's not an ideology, but the imagery behind it, like the whole satanic aspect, like they welcome it so much into their so-called community. that I'm not surprised that people are like concerned about it.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things the documentary talks about too.
Yeah.
And
They're not like denouncing it. They're not like going against people saying that they're satanic. No one's really saying like, oh no, we're not, right? Or are they like actively saying we're not?
No, I think that's kind of like the documentary talks about that, like how it gets a bad rep and stuff, and how essentially like it started from like an unhappiness with like the status quo and stuff, and it was like a place where like a bunch of losers could like hang out. So that one of like the most influential things that built metal up was Dee Snider's like, or Twisted Sister was the band he was in, like We're Not Gonna Take It. Yeah.
That's
and
metal.
That was like one of the things that started kicking it off and stuff. And then metal really grew in like the 90s and like 2000s and stuff. And so essentially it talks about like how they summoned that guy to Congress and everything to talk about like, oh, your other song talks about like it's another song called Under the Blade or something, and they're like, oh, it talks about like killing someone with like a knife and stuff, and he's like, oh no, actually it was written about a friend's throat surgery, but the thing with metal is like you can get what you want out of it and stuff. And so do you know Al Gore? He used to be like the vice president.
He was almost gonna be president.
Yeah. So it was his wife who was leading this like parents censorship committee or whatever, and so they were questioning him, and then he's like, I can't help it if Tippy Gore, or whatever his wife's name is, like has a dirty mind and stuff, but like blah blah blah. That's not what it was about. And essentially like it really talks to like music and like music as an art form and getting what you want out of it. So there are like Swedish death metal and stuff like gets into some like really really dark places and stuff, but it also talks about how like
Viking life and their like history and shit like that.
No,
like Amon Amarth was
I don't know what that is.
Was a metal band that I used to listen to.
Oh, okay.
And that it was like Viking metal.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, and so it goes into like some really dark places and stuff, but it also like it was a really really good documentary, and it got me like thinking a bit more about like why metal has such like a bad rep and stuff. And so he also goes to this huge like metal convention, or like not a convention, like a huge metal music festival in somewhere in Scandinavia, and it was just a very like interesting environment to see, like a lot of people who are like very close and tight knit.
They're super friendly and with each other. It's just like totally when they're in their art and when they're performing their art, it's like very hyper aggressive. That's what the genre is meant to be. For sure. It's like screaming and like outcries and whatever. It's like Rage Against the Machine.
They interviewed Tom Morello.
Like super anti-establishment band, and they're screaming. They're making metal music, but it has like a purpose to it. Their lyrics actually mean something. It's yet again, as the music is, it's like an outcry against like the government and stuff like that. So it is very unique in its own right. But I feel like it gets a bad rep because of a lot of subgenres that derive from it. And a lot of people would kind of categorize these subgenres into the whole genre of metal, and then it gives it entirely a bad rep. I think this kind of like dates back to hip hop in like the 90s and 80s, where it kind of connotes a lot with like gang culture, when like a lot of times the genre itself doesn't represent it, but it's because of subgenres of like gangster rap and like nowadays like drill. Drill is basically a genre that Cody really likes. It's like UK rap grime, but it's like gang affiliated. And that gives the whole genre a bad rep because there's a weird subsection of it. And yeah, it's very, very interesting.
Yeah. They talked to this one band who essentially like it was so grim, and I think they were like a Swedish band, and there's like been a ton of controversy about this one thing because the main like vocalist or like the leader of the band or whatever in the 2000s or 90s or something essentially like committed suicide. Like he was like very like into death and comfortable with death. It wasn't like a thing that you can spin that how you want with like mental health and stuff, but he was like had always been like fascinated with mortality and very comfortable with his own mortality. And so one of the other band members found the body first and then used that as the album cover essentially.
What?
And then they used bits of his skull and handed it out on necklaces to their like closest fans.
Okay, that's really messed up.
Yeah. And then the
That
guy
makes
who
me
did
feel
that,
so uncomfortable.
yeah, the one band member who did that, like some people were like, most of the band was so disgusted with it that they left, and then one of the ex-band members actually killed that guy because they were so disgusted with what he did and stuff. So it was like a whole crazy thing. But the Sam Dunn like interviews them, and he's like warning like this interview gets a bit crazy, and it was like it was a bit of a crazy interview.
That's messed up.
Yeah,
but yet again, people would see that and like be like, "Oh, dude, that's so metal."
Yeah.
That's so metal.
Yeah.
Because it is.
Mm-hmm. But I would recommend the interview. It's won like a ton of awards and stuff. So sorry, not the interview, the documentary as a whole. So
I think it also gets a bad rep. And what's that called? For example, when we were watching the documentary about the Cecil Hotel. You still haven't seen it, right?
No, I don't think.
Essentially, I think I've explained this in our previous episode when we were talking about murder mysteries, but there was this one guy who was like a death metal artist, and then coincidentally, when Eliza Lamb died, he had a song previously about him being in the Cecil Hotel and then drowning an Asian woman, and then people were like, "Oh, dude, you definitely killed her. You definitely killed her." It's such a weird thing to sing about that in the first place. But yet again, apparently he wasn't in the Cecil Hotel when it happened. Right. But it's quite bait to be like, oh, dude, I'm singing about. It's a metaphor. Yeah. It's a metaphor. I'm like, a metaphor for what?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not dissing the genre. I'm just like confused.
Right. You should watch the documentary.
Unable to understand. I did have like a bit of a phase, a tiny bit of a phase.
Yeah,
it was after like the punk rock phase. I started like, oh, punk rock is kind of like baby stuff.
Yeah.
I started getting to metal, and I'm like. Probably didn't have to go through that phase. It was like not even a year, probably a couple of months, and I was kind of done with it.
Yeah, throughout the documentary, I was very impressed and like surprised with how articulate most of these people are. So they interviewed two of the band members from Slipknot, which for people who don't know, it's just like insane, like super rowdy, like all of the band members wear masks that are kind of like very grotesque Halloween masks and stuff. And all of the music videos are just like starting like fires and burning stuff. But they were so articulate. They talked about growing up in like Des Moines, Iowa, and like that's where the craziest fans are from, because like your life is pretty much like nothing. Like they were so dissatisfied with their like life, and that was like what blended like their rage and like discontentment into this music and stuff. But they were like very, very articulate and stuff.
I think there's a difference between metal artists who are like that, like the famous ones like Slipknot and like Rage Against the Machine, where they have a purpose behind their like music and are using like the metal platform as a way to express themselves, as opposed to like artists, I'm not sure, but I feel like there are quite a few that do it for the sort of like shock value of how morbid and grotesque their like lyrics are and their visuals are. And I don't know, it's weird.
Yeah,
there's a large spectrum, and
have
yet to understand any of it.
I mean, I guess you could also say that those people have a purpose behind their art too. Like the people who have like a lot more of a like grotesque or shock factor and stuff. For me, it just like something that I try to do with music is keep like a very, very open mind. So like a lot of people are like, oh, like I listen to like a lot of music, but like there's no way I would ever listen to like country music or like something like that. And so like, I don't know, what I've tried to do is just like keep as open of a mind as I can with music and like try to listen to a bunch of different stuff, even if like I personally really don't like it and stuff.
Okay, what genres of music are you not a fan of?
What am I not a fan of? I would say most naturally, like, I'm not super into, like, country music, but it's something that I've tried to, like, now and then, like, dip my toes into, just because I feel like I don't want to write off, like, an entire genre of music, but, like, where country music came from is, like, quite problematic sometimes and stuff, too. And just, like, the twang and stuff, I don't super love, but I like try not to write off an entire genre of music, or at least like with art too. Like if you ever go to an art exhibit and it's like something stupid, it's like, oh, like it's just like a dot of paint on the wall and stuff, like I could do this if you gave me like $12 or something. And like those people at exhibits like just piss me off so much, because I think like, okay, fair enough if it looks like a band-aid stuck to a wall or something, but for me it's about like the artist's message and stuff behind it. Like I've seen art that like visually has seemed like very simple or just like kind of confusing, but if you read like the actual work and like time and thought that went into it, like that's for me what is like really interesting rather than like it being.
But do you ever think when you see that and they write the story behind it that it wasn't something that took years to contemplate over? Maybe they just wanted to produce something quickly. Do you feel there's like a difference behind that, or like no matter what, like as long as there's a message, it's fine?
For me, I'm kind of more along the lines of like, if there's a message behind it and I think the message is interesting, it's fine. Like, I hate the art that's also like the message behind it is just like layers and layers of like very like complex language that like no one is meant to understand, you know? But like I've seen art that like has like been very disappointing sometimes to look at, but then like the actual messaging of it like makes me appreciate it more and look into it. So yeah.
But sometimes like contemporary art, for example, they'll be like they put like a banana peel on the ground. It'll be called like Untitled, and there's no story behind it. The whole concept is like the person who watches it can give it meaning. Do you still find that like acceptable to a certain extent? Even though it's like it's quite outrageous in a sense to. I mean, art has no definition, right? It's whatever you make it to be. But do you ever try to gauge art based on at least effort? Like, it's hard. It's hard to gauge that too because you don't know what's the process behind it. But you still have to kind of assess that because you are the person there watching or spectating the art. If the artist is not able to kind of communicate that message. That they actually put a lot of effort behind it. Do you think it lacks the substance?
I wouldn't say necessarily. Like, I think an artist could be like, the point of this whole thing is that I put like 0 effort into it or something. And like, if that's interesting enough for me, then like I'll kind of get behind it.
That's just sellout excuse. Like, the whole point of my art is that there is no art.
Yeah, but I think that's a valid like artistic message and stuff too.
I don't know. Let's just say I'm not the biggest fan of a lot of contemporary art. It's just not my cup of tea, but to each their own. Anyways, let's get into our weekly catch up since I started just now. Why don't you give us a slice of what you did this week?
Sure. I honestly didn't do much. Like this week I was just at work and stuff. But we as a friend group grabbed dinner on Friday night, which was really fun. Ate way overpriced tacos. But
how much for a taco? Let them know.
The one I had was 60 Hong Kong, which is like
with service charge as well, so it's like 60.
Oh my gosh, yeah, $8 for one taco, which is just like
$60, $8.
60. Yeah.
Holy moly,
dude. Let me just.
The thing is though, like Hong Kong,
more than $8.
It's not very accessible to get Mexican food in Hong Kong. Much less so good Mexican food. And for those who don't know, like this restaurant we went to was tied to a chef who was on Final Table. It's this Netflix show it's like a Netflix cooking competition with some of the best chefs in the world. And I think he definitely got a lot more popularity through it. But originally, all these chefs are really famous to begin with. And I think they opened a Mexican restaurant in Hong Kong a couple of years ago. And that's the one that we went to. It was, I must say, it was really good. But, yet again, very overpriced.
Yeah, for sure. Especially as someone who, like, partially grew up in LA. Or, like, the last time I visited LA was just a year and a half ago, too. And my friend picked me up from the airport, and we drove to a food truck to get dollar tacos. Yeah. And so I got, like, 8 tacos for $8. Yeah. And they, like, tasted pretty much the same as the ones last night. But Hong Kong rent is super high, too. And, like... Hong Kong Mexican food isn't super accessible. So.
Like, for example, like a bottle of tajin, like that spice thing. I don't know how much it costs in the U.S. or Mexico, but it probably costs like 20 times that in Hong Kong. So it kind of makes sense why they upscale it and like put such a high price tag to it. The thing is, though, I think that leads to like an interesting point that I want to pick your brain about. It's the whole idea of, I know like you love food, but... Do you place a large importance in terms of like trying a lot of different things in terms of like high-end cuisine and just everything? Are you a big food person?
No, I'm definitely not a big food person. Like I don't super care about that's just not where I want to spend a ton of my money. And so if there's ever like a really nice restaurant opening up in Hong Kong, like I'm never one of the people who like wants to try it out or like has it on a bucket list.
I think we did talk about this when we had that episode about spending money in materialistic things.
That was episode 32.
Was it?
Yeah.
It was last episode.
Well, we swapped it around, right? Because we did the spicy one.
Yeah.
Too, so.
But so I guess this riffs off it pretty well. But essentially, what I want to ask you is, a lot of cuisines kind of tie itself to being more economical. A lot of perceptions of certain cuisines tends to be more economical. What is your idea about like putting a luxury twist or like a premium price tag to things that you can get for cheaper? Like as you said about Mexican food, you've had super affordable, super economical like Mexican food that's like almost of the same quality as the one that we had a couple of nights ago. Like what do you think about this whole idea of like I guess making it more luxurious, more premium for a newer, younger audience per se, and also it being somewhere like on the other side of the world.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if we'll see eye to eye about this, but for me, it's kind of like a class issue with things like that, which is like inherently like intersected with like issues of race and stuff. So at least where I stand, I don't have a huge issue with like luxurifying or whatever, like a very common food, as long as like the messaging behind it is like, or not so much the messaging, but the people who are creating and actually like disseminating all of this stuff and behind it like are of the same like ethnicity of like where the food is meant to be coming. You know what I mean? Yeah. So if like a black person did like a very like high end version of like chicken and waffles or something like, or like black soul food or something like that, then I think that's okay. But like if a white person or like an Asian person was to start like a soul food joint in Hong Kong, like that would be so problematic.
Have you seen, there was an article way back when about like a white person opening a restaurant that's like, cleaner Chinese food, because like
in Hong Kong,
I think somewhere in the US, because they were essentially talking about how like how dirty and how unhealthy Chinese food is, so we're gonna like add a twist to it. It's the same shit as like the mahjong line kind of vibes.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't disagree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. The thing about luxurifying foods and cuisines that I'm like having this mental battle with myself is like I sometimes think of things in terms of like maybe like Vietnamese cuisine. I could get like a bowl of pho for like 50 Hong Kong dollars. Why would I pay 100 or whatever or 200 for it?
For like Wagyu pho.
For Wagyu pho. And then I'm like, this is so stupid. Like I can pay so much less for the same thing, or not. It's probably not the same thing, but something that resembles whatever is authentic to the cuisine itself. But then, in the same time, I feel like it's slightly unhealthy to think that way. There's no like, I can pay rather blah 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 for whatever, because that kind of hinders a certain cuisine from developing into something else or growing in itself. It puts like the cuisine in this hole where it has to be like affordable stuff. There's no prestige behind it. Like when it comes to a lot of cuisines that we associate with prestige, we think, like Italian, we think French, we think Spanish. And then when it comes to like cheaper foods, we're Chinese food, Thai food. Like it's weird to connote different cuisines with different price tags and different price classes. And I think it's easy to think like, it's like, why would I pay so much for Chinese food when I can get it for this cheap? But inherently what we're doing is restricting Chinese food to that stereotype that Chinese food has to be cheap. And I think a lot of people don't realize that, but inherently it does make an effect on a cultural cuisine and how they are able and willing to grow in society.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
That's
and I think
a few cents behind my idea, and like, because I've been watching. Wait, actually, you say what you want to say.
You
first.
go.
Okay, essentially, I watched a lot of documentaries about food beyond just like the idea of cooking. There was a show called Ugly Delicious by this really famous Asian chef called Dave Chang, and they kind of explored the cultural aspects of different famous foods, like the cultural aspects of fried rice with Chinese culture, the cultural aspects of fried chicken with the black community, and like it's such basic foods that we encounter on a daily basis, but we never think about the cultural context behind it and like how it affects the society as a whole. And I think food seems to be trivialized quite a bit, and we don't really realize, like a lot of us, how much of an impact it makes on a community or a society or like an ethnicity. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a ton of sense. I think like it's a very like Western world conversation that we're having too, and stuff like. It's in like Hong Kong, or like we're not even talking about Hong Kong too much because there's a ton of like luxury like Chinese food places here and stuff, but it's much more like the US or Europe and stuff where like the convention is like high cuisine is French like pretty much all the time, you know. Or like just like very European centric for like high cuisine or like what complex food is meant to taste like.
I think the only Asian cuisine that was able to break that norm was Japanese food.
For sure.
Apart from that, everyone would have this like preconceived notion that certain Asian cuisines are known to be cheap and affordable.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, that's an interesting conversation to be had. Anything else you want to add on your weekly catch up?
And then I just got dinner last night with our friend Rachel too, which was
that?
a ton of fun. It was very fun. We got free shots at this Italian place that Ian and I have been to before.
I love this place. It's called, for people who are in Hong Kong, it's called Pinko Polino. It's around the Shongman area. It's near Poing Fong, and they have really, really good homemade pasta. Like I've never really gone to a restaurant where they make handmade fusilli. That's normally a pasta you like wouldn't think people would need to home make or make at home, but it is really good in my opinion.
Yeah. We sat in the exact same chairs that you and I sat in, which is on a bar, like right next to the window, which is very nice. But then Rachel really wanted a photo of us, and so she got the waiter at the end of our meal, who was super friendly and gave us free shots and stuff, to go outside and get a photo of us.
He was trying to take it in the restaurant. She's like, no, please. Outside.
He was like, oh, you're giving me a big task, right? And then we're like, yeah. And then Rachel and I always get this because we're such close friends and we're very comfortable with each other. So like we like cried next to each other like at a thing at meals and stuff before. And so people always think that we're dating. So then when he was outside taking a photo, he's like motioning for us to like lean into each other, like touch each other while we're doing it. We're like, yeah.
Start handshaking.
So it was just a very funny moment. But then we had this one other lunch back in like June or something, and we were talking about something very heavy, and so there were like some tears and stuff. But she's like, Cody, everyone is going to think that you're breaking up with me right now because I'm like at a mess and you're like trying to like comfort me and stuff. But it was a funny.
You're just at the restaurant shouting, "We are not breaking up. I am not breaking up with her right now."
I'm comforting her about something. But it was a very fun moment. So yeah, that's pretty much my week.
For me, in terms of my weekly catch up, because I need to take a look at the notes. Yet again, I wrote Friday night dinner as well. I don't know. After going out for dinner on Friday night, I don't feel like there was that much of a difference compared to not being able to eat dinner. Because it normally closes off. Like dinner service used to shut off at 6 p.m. So there was basically no dinner
because
service.
Because of COVID. Like it was a government thing, like citywide.
But then now it's 10 p.m. And restaurants are starting to open. I feel like I'm still not fully engaged into like how things are like changing. It still hasn't hit me that things are opening back up. I've been living basically the same, but it was nice. It was nice. Not like the only thing that hit me was like the fact that I don't have to rush. There's no rush involved, and I think that was nice. I forgot what this like pace of living was. Yesterday, for example, I was just out all day. Had to run a lot of errands. Had to grab food and everything, and Cody, I was looking at the notes and I got so distracted. But yeah, it was just nice to be able to take my time and then end up having dinner outside as well. Yeah. But yeah, I think it was an interesting change of the status quo per se.
We'll see how long it lasts. We had 33 cases yesterday.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, it was all from like one restaurant in like K11.
The K11. It's like beginning to be like a cluster now. So like all those people who went.
You know, my mom was like asking me to go to TST yesterday.
Oh, really?
Thank God I didn't go to TST. Oh my God. But what else? I have our first 5-day work week was last week. Was it? After the Chinese New Year break, and it's just I remind myself how goddamn long that extra day is, and I constantly talk about this, but my whole ideology behind productivity and 4-day work weeks. I'm not going to get into that, and I don't think that's very
We've talked about
reasonable in Hong Kong as well. I don't think it really fits or can get ingrained into the work culture of Hong Kong. But yet again, something I advocate for. And the biggest thing in my weekly catch up was watching Ratatouille on Friday night. I freaking love that movie, and I completely forgot that I love the movie. It's one of those movies where this time it just like was clips that popped up on my recommended on YouTube, because I've been watching a lot of like movie clips, especially from two movies that Cody and I really like. And I think it decided to work with the algorithm and pop another few movie clips out, and Ratatouille is one of them. Started watching it and I was like, holy shit, this is like such a monumental part of my childhood. And me being someone who loves to cook and loves food, seeing like all of that happen, I'm just like, this movie is an absolute masterpiece. But when I dialed down, like looking at like the final scenes where all the rats come in to cook this massive meal because all the chefs have left, I'm like, that's freaking disgusting. Imagine like, okay, yeah, they're probably making Michelin 3-star meals, but they're rats.
Yeah.
But yet again, they talk about like the movie was essentially trying to like personify rats and trying to like make them into something that we don't find disgusting, but still it's freaking gross.
Yeah, for sure. The scene where the health inspector comes in and they tie him up and everything.
That's actually so nasty.
Yeah.
But that's it for the culture corner. I think we can dive into our topic. You wanna lead the charge?
Yeah. So last week we talked about murder mystery in Los Angeles from like 1947, I think. And so we said we would do a part 2, but then we kind of forgot to do like a lot of in-depth research and stuff. So we were gonna stick with kind of like the LA, because we talked about last week how like LA has just like very notorious murders and like the possible causes behind that, most of which is like one of the like the geography of it, and then also how like second, like LA is just a very like melting pot of a bunch of different people trying to start like new lives and new identities and stuff and make a name for themselves. Like LA is like where people move to like get a fresh start in life, you know. And then the third being just like it gets a ton of like publicity and stuff as well,
because that's where it's at. Hollywood is there.
And so anyways, like the whole Manson family. And then I recently watched this week the Nightstalker series on Netflix, which is good. I would not recommend watching it like alone or at night and stuff too, because it's just very grim.
It's very heavy.
Yeah, it is really, really heavy. But Nightstalker, for people who don't know, we've talked about it a tiny bit before when we talked about the Cecil Hotel in LA. But it was a series of like murders that happened in 1984 and 1985 in the US. And essentially it happened in LA, parts of like LA LA County, greater LA County, which is super, super spread out. And so this is back in like the 80s when like all like serial killers in general were like kind of a new concept. Like that came about in like the 60s and 70s, but before that, like a serial killing was like tied to like one specific like group of people, right? So like Ted Bundy was like young, like college aged women that he could
predictable.
Like, exactly. So then like everyone kind of knows, like if you see if you have a young college aged friend who's a girl, like walk her home at night, you know, like it's easier to like predict and stuff. But this is one of the first cases where it was just like indiscriminate. Like he would like do awful things to like literally every person, like young kids, like old people too, and like young college aged women. But then like there was no like race or like gender or like age thing. And so it was one of the first instances where the fear factor was pretty much like through the roof, in that anyone could be next. Like there was like no like rhyme or reason to the people that he chose.
For people who are interested in this kind of stuff, I probably recommend this plenty of times, but Mindhunter, it's a show on Netflix that kind of talks about the time period when the FBI when the FBI decided to like look into serial killers, and then finally were able to classify what serial killers were. I guess it's the whole idea, as Cody was talking about, looking beyond like the physical attributes and more basing it off intentions. And I think that's what the Nightstalker is doing.
For sure. So yeah, I thought it was a very, very good interview. And there's not interview. I keep calling them interviews, but the interviewing in it was very, very good. Yeah. It was a very good documentary series. And I thought a couple of things were interesting that I thought we could talk about. Some of them I've talked about with you just privately, so we'll have to act like we're talking about.
Wow, that's crazy.
But the first was that I don't know how they do it and how they track down all these people. Like the Netflix teams must just be huge and the work that they put into it. But for me, it really humanized the people who were doing this. Yeah. So the two main cops who were drafted onto the Nightstalker or whatever they were called before they got called the Nightstalker. It talks about how it was this young Latinx cop who had done a bit of time in the military, gone to college, and he was super, super young. And then he got paired with Frank Salerno, who was this big time, super well respected LA cop who had worked on the Hillside Strangler case, yet another series of serial killings in LA. And so he had already had this huge case under his belt and stuff. And so it just talked about how easy it is when you're under all this pressure and all this stress and stuff, how that seeps into your family life. So he was a new dad with a couple kids, and he was always coming home, and he would try to get 2 hours of sleep after he got back at 2 a.m. And then as he was talking to his wife and taking his shoes off and being wake me up in 2 hours, he got another call that there was another murder that just happened at 4 a.m. and he had to go out for that and stuff too. And so it talked about the real detrimental effect it had on his family life and relationships and stuff, and how his wife essentially said, we're leaving until this case is solved and stuff, because murders were happening closer and closer to their home. I think the breaking point was a murder happened 5 minutes away from their house and stuff, and she's
we can't stay here. It's just not safe.
Yeah, which is totally understandable, but just the pressure that these people are under and stuff. So
wild,
because often in what is it, CSI or CSPD and stuff, all these
they do
murder
all
shows
in one episode.
Yeah, well, they have the perfect family life, you know what I mean, and they are totally fine with they don't get detrimental effects, or they don't turn into alcoholics, and stuff that. It's just a very glamorous life. So it did a good job of humanizing the people in it too. So that was one thing that I think
what shows nowadays, especially crime shows, are good at doing is trying to incorporate that humanizing aspect to it. The detrimental effects of being in this sort of environment and being exposed to this kind of thing. Yeah, I keep referring back to Mindhunter. Essentially, one of the agents was constantly interviewing psychopaths, and then throughout the series you can see how that has affected his mental mind state. This kind of stuff is very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. So I thought it did a very, very good job with that. It also was very interesting to see how, because it's LA and it was a huge publicized thing. Yeah. And there was such fear factor, the media was really what made this whole case blow up. And they were the people who called them the Nightstalker. It was one radio show, and they were all racing to kind of make up a name. So some of them were the walk-in murderer or something like that, because he would walk into people's homes who hadn't locked their windows and stuff. And then there was some other one, but the one that stuck was Nightstalker. And so that was interesting, but
it is very ominous of a name, though.
Yeah. The whole thing, what was so interesting about this case was that the only reason they were able to identify and link all these different murders was this one cop, this Mexican cop essentially. Yeah. He got laughed at by a lot of his white old superiors and stuff, saying there's no way that all these cases are related, that's impossible. But he was able to link a single shoe print to all of these cases. And
I remember watching that part as well.
It was an Avia shoe, which is not a Nike or Puma or Adidas shoe. It's super, super specific. And so they found the exact model that had the model and size, and so there were only 1,600 size 11 whatever XYZ model shoes imported into the US, and of them only 20 were black colored, and they knew it was a black color, and then only one went to LA. And that was the one shoe that this guy was committing all of his murders in, that they could link it to, which I just got goosebumps when I heard that in the documentary. But essentially, like, it was like of like utmost importance because they couldn't let it slip that like the police knew about this, otherwise he would throw away the shoes, right?
Yeah.
So they had to be like super super confidential about all this stuff. But then one time it got leaked to the media that they had that shoe, and so the news anchor was like, I'm just giving you a heads up, but we're gonna talk about this on the news tonight. And they're like, no, you can't talk about this. And so essentially like detailed like a
did they end up talking about it?
Well, they didn't. They pressured the police into giving them a one-on-one exclusive interview with the two police behind it, like Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo, like the two people behind it. But like it was a very interesting thing to see how like the police and media like interact with each other, and there's like bargaining and trading and bartering.
There's so much like to it, especially back in those days, because back in those days like the media ran things. Nowadays they don't have the same sort of power that they used to have, like of traditional print media and all that stuff. And also the craziest thing is the idea of finding something that you don't understand or finding something that hasn't been found before. Because as you were saying, that serial killers weren't classified back in those days. People were laughing at you and like you don't even know what you're finding yourself. You were able to smart man. He's a smart ass
No,
man.
he definitely is. And so that was super interesting. And then the other thing I was going to mention is a bit long, but one of the other things that I thought was super interesting is that my parents grew up in like California in the 80s. So they like vividly remember like the Nightstalker and stuff. And so most of the crimes he committed were in Los Angeles, but then there was like 4 or 5 cases that he confessed to that were in San Francisco as well. Because it's only like a 6-hour drive from LA to San Francisco. And both of my parents grew up in like the San Francisco Bay Area in the 80s. And so they were like ending middle school, going into high school as this stuff was happening. And so it was just very interesting to like get more real world context for it and stuff and like talk to my parents.
I remember like we talked about this in a previous episode when we were talking about murder mysteries, but why do you think like LA is this melting pot for serial killers? Do you think, as we previously talked about, it's the whole idea that it's only publicized because it's in LA? Or do you think there's like something drawing these people, or there's like this aura within the entire place that brings out and breeds these kind of people?
Well, I mean, I kind of what I talked about at the beginning of this episode, like I feel like it's where everyone goes to start a new life for themselves. So there's all these young hopefuls and stuff that are like very easily persuadable about
like
things.
A humongous victim pool.
Yeah. It's also why like LA is like the breeding grounds of like the Church of Scientology and stuff too.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Scientology was bred.
The Scientology headquarters is in Hollywood.
Like it's Scientology headquarters?
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge.
God.
They're like a huge organization. I'm sure there's Scientologists
Shout
in
out
Hong
to
Kong.
Tom Cruise.
But I think like that's one of the biggest things, to be completely honest. And then like everything in LA is like publicized. There's something about like a murder in Hollywood, you know, and like glamour and like noir and everything. Yeah, for sure. So I think that's kind of like what I attribute it to.
Personally, being a American boy, are you a fan? Are you
of the murders in LA?
No, of LA the city.
LA the city.
Do you see yourself ever like living there?
No. I grew up there, but it's not like a city like Hong Kong. Like you've been to LA, but it's not like, it's much more kind of like Tokyo in that it's like a very like non-centralized city. Like it's huge. Like it's truly, truly huge. There's not like a central business district or like a central downtown area. There is, but it's not like Hong Kong where everything's happening in like Central or Sheungwan or like Admiralty and stuff. And so like it's just super spread out. And so it's very common to have like a hour and a half or 2 hour commute like every day, and that's just like not what I'm about. And the weather is super hot and
How
stuff,
about the people and the culture?
The people and the culture, it is very diverse. It is very diverse. So it's a great like diverse community, and there's like a ton of like really good food and stuff, but I just prefer things to be more centralized.
It's definitely, in my opinion, a very vacation area. I would hate to live there.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's very interesting. On that note, Tokyo is not really the same. Tokyo does has like its centralized business.
It does,
like
but
Ginza.
It's very spread out though.
Yeah.
The difference between LA and Tokyo is like Tokyo has a much more robust like public transport system, so it like feels a lot closer and more interconnected. But if you look at the actual like landscape of Tokyo.
It's
like
humongous.
it's massive, and like it's very common that like you would be commuting to like the equivalent of like Hong Kong, me commuting all the way to like Yunlong or like Tuen for like a thing, whereas most people like commute to like one of the central business areas. True. So especially if you're like not in finance or law or one of those like super downtown ones, it's like very polycentric is the term that we use at our think tank. But yeah,
I think it's interesting how Netflix has kind of cemented itself as this like provider of high quality documentaries. I feel like no other streaming platform has that sort of clout that Netflix has nowadays, which is kind of weird. It's an interesting tangent for them to take away from it being like primarily a movie streaming service and then branching into TV shows and then now being such a big player in documentaries.
Yeah,
they do an excellent job, I must say, in telling these stories. Apart from the fact that the Cecil Hotel interviewers were pretty bad.
Really?
And not interviewers, interviewees. They were bad in the way that they don't say anything that makes any sense, but also like some of them are kind of vague. Like some of them I'm like maybe they did it, but maybe that's what they're trying to go for at the same time. Right. So yeah.
One of the other notable things about Nightstalker was that they talked about how in like LA and just police departments in general, it's super fractionalized. So like there's like federal like agents and stuff, but then there's also like state agents and then like LA County agents, but then every city within LA County or town or whatever has their own police department and their own like crime investigation unit. So there's a lot of like butting heads for the most awards, and it's like all these macho type A personalities all trying to get the most like achievements and accolades under themselves, right? So like you wouldn't share evidence with someone because you want to be the person to like be the person.
There's a lot of politics behind it.
And so the Los Angeles PD and then whatever police department that these two guys were working out of, like the main two police people, like would not like share evidence at all. And so there were cases where like they needed this car to be fingerprinted because they found his car, but they booked it into like a lot, and then the Los Angeles PD people put the car like outside for like 5 weeks in the burning sun, and so all of like it was burned up.
Were gone.
So like everything was gone, and like in that case, in that time, like 5 more murders were committed. So they're like, we could have saved like potentially like so many more lives if like there hadn't been so much like infighting about like evidence and stuff. That's like so
messed up. Yeah. The competitive and hierarchical nature of like the police departments in that sense, the system is fucked up.
No, for sure. And like whichever police department that found it would get like a huge increase in funding from the state next year, right? Like it's all tied to like money and all of this like politicking and stuff, but it like results in like lives being lost where they could have been avoided.
That's such a weird system. It shouldn't be objective based. Like you're not supposed to be like raking up the amount of tickets you have each month or the amount of things you've solved. The whole idea of like protecting societies to hope there's less and less of it instead of racking up numbers. It's not a fucking video game, is it?
Yeah. So it was just like
that's so weird.
Crazy.
That's
a bit crazy up. Too.
Like you're literally hindering everything by being competitive.
Yeah.
And also, I forgot what's the difference between type A and type B.
Oh, type A is just like alpha person, not like wanting to like pump your chest out and like have kind of like a fight.
It's just 2 A and B.
Yeah. Okay. Type B is more like beta or whatever. Yeah. But so yeah, it's just like it's crazy. Like this is something that's preventing people from like finding evidence and stuff.
It probably was prolonged. The entire case was prolonged by so much due to like stupid stuff like this.
For sure.
Yeah. Are we going to end it there?
Yeah, probably.
I think we can talk about this for hours upon hours. There's plenty of mysteries out there. I think it could be like a segment, maybe in the future, of something interesting that comes across. But I think we'll end it there. Thanks for listening to another episode. Follow us on Instagram at PitcherPod. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. We're going to be giving shout-outs to everyone who rates and reviews us on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe and check us out on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we grab a picture. Oh, I can't speak. And we'll grab a picture with you guys next time. Bye.
Also, let us know if you liked our La La Land singing. We're not going to do it again, but please give us like positive feedback.
Please.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.